Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Hannah sat cross-legged on the couch, a knitted throw wrapped around her shoulders as she tried logging into the streaming service they'd shared for years. She typed in the familiar password, Josiah Hand Hannah 2020, but it bounced back. Incorrect password. Her brows furrowed, maybe a typo. She tried again. Still wrong. With a hint of hesitation, she clicked Forgot Password and saw the recovery email didn't even match hers anymore. That was odd. Josiah had always been indifferent to these accounts. It was Hannah who set them up, chose the shows, even organized the profiles. But now, it had all been altered. She sat in silence, her eyes glued to the screen as the cursor blinked back at her like a quiet warning. She didn't panic. She didn't even sigh. She just stared. The change was subtle, almost dismissible, but it planted a seed. Later that night, when Josiah got home, she brought it up casually as he walked into the kitchen with his usual air of distraction. "Did you change the password to Netflix?" she asked, watching his back as he opened the fridge. There was a slight pause. Too slight for someone with nothing to hide. "Oh, yeah, I think I did. Work buddies used it once. I thought I'd secure it." He didn't turn to face her. "You could have told me," she replied softly, her voice laced with the calmness of someone used to swallowing disappointment. Josiah shrugged. "It's not a big deal, Hannah. You're overthinking again." And just like that, he walked out with a soda in hand, leaving her with that old familiar ache. But something had shifted. Not just in the password, but in the way he no longer included her in simple decisions. It wasn't about a subscription. It was about being shut out. She sank back into the couch, not to rest, but to observe. Quietly, carefully. A storm never announced itself with thunder. It often started with a breeze. Hannah wasn't one to snoop. She believed that dignity meant trusting someone until they gave you a reason not to. But lately, Josiah had been dropping reasons like breadcrumbs, subtle and scattered. That afternoon, while collecting laundry from the guest room he now used under the excuse of late-night work calls, she found his blazer draped over the chair, uncharacteristically wrinkled. She slipped her hand into the inner pocket, intending to check for his forgotten wallet. Instead, her fingers brushed against a stiff piece of paper. She pulled it out, a glossy receipt from Liqueur, a luxurious, French-themed rooftop restaurant known for its exclusivity and candlelit skyline dinners. The date stamped at the bottom hit her like cold rain. Last Thursday night, the same night Josiah claimed he was in Abuja for a client meeting and asked her not to call because of network issues. Hannah stared at the itemized list, 2 entrees, wine, dessert, and a single red rose listed as a special request. It wasn't the total cost that stung. It was the intimacy of it. That evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, watching a news segment neither of them was really following, Hannah broke the silence. "How was Abuja?" Her voice was even detached. Josiah didn't look up. Draining. The client kept shifting the goalposts. "I didn't even sleep well." She nodded and waited. "Liqueur must have helped, though," she added casually, not looking at him but watching his reflection on the TV screen. He paused, blinked, and then slowly turned to her. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his tone suddenly cautious. Hannah met his gaze, tilting her head. "Nothing. Just thought the place was more romantic than business." Josiah shifted uncomfortably, standing up to stretch. "You're reading into things again. I met a vendor for a quick meal. Not everything is a mystery, Hannah." She gave him a tight smile and returned her eyes to the screen. "Of course. Just dinner with a vendor. With wine, dessert, and a rose." She didn't say another word that night. She didn't ask questions either. But in her chest, something silent began to harden, not suspicion anymore, but certainty. Sunday mornings were sacred in their home, quiet, slow, peaceful. Josiah liked to take his car for a drive around the estate with gospel music blasting, while Hannah watered her plants and brewed fresh coffee. That morning, however, Josiah took Hannah's car instead, claiming his tire pressure was off. As he stepped out, Hannah decided to retrieve her earbuds from his vehicle. The moment she opened the driver's side door, her phone buzzed, Bluetooth connected, Josiah's Lexus. That wasn't the surprise. What made her pause was the dashboard screen still active, revealing a call history. The last call read Joe Electric's 11:48 p.m. Beneath it were several recent calls, all marked Joe Electric's, always late at night. She stared at it, her lips parting slowly. She knew his vendors and contractors. None of them had cutesy aliases or midnight check-ins. She tapped on the name and let it ring once, just once, before ending the call. A woman's voice had answered, breathless and warm. "Hey, babe. You're early today." When Josiah returned an hour later, whistling as he tossed her keys onto the counter, Hannah stood by the sink, pouring water into a glass with slow, deliberate movements. "How's Joe Electric's doing?" she asked without turning. His hand froze midair, the smile on his lips evaporating. "What?" he asked. "The electrician who answers your calls at midnight with 'Hey, babe.'" The clink of the glass against the sink was the only sound in the room for a moment. "You went through my call log?" he asked, his tone suddenly sharp, defensive. Hannah turned around and met his eyes. "No. My phone connected. Your car snitched on you." Josiah let out a forced chuckle. "You're blowing things out of proportion. That's Josephine. She's a contractor I've been working with on a side project." "And she calls you babe now?" Hannah's voice was calm, almost too calm. He had no answer. Instead, he muttered something about needing a shower and disappeared down the hall. She didn't follow. She simply stood there, heart quiet, thoughts racing. His lies were no longer cleverly disguised. He wasn't even trying. And that made it worse. He didn't fear losing her. Shower, humming carelessly behind the closed bathroom door. She glanced at the screen. Joe Electric's calling. The name was like a bruise now. She walked over slowly, intending only to look. But then it stopped ringing and, seconds later, began again, persistent. Almost instinctively, she picked it up and whispered, "Hello?" A light laugh echoed through the receiver, and then the voice that followed pierced her like glass. "Miss me already? I was just thinking about last night. That thing you did with your tongue." Hannah ended the call with shaking fingers, her face pale. Her breath caught in her throat. The words weren't just vulgar, they were personal, intimate, specific. They erased every doubt she had tried to suppress. When Josiah emerged from the bathroom, rubbing a towel over his head, he found Hannah sitting stiffly on the couch, her eyes vacant. His phone lay untouched beside her. "What's going on?" he asked. She looked up at him slowly. "She called," she said softly. I picked up. For a moment, Josiah froze. Then he scoffed. "You shouldn't be answering my calls, Hannah." That was his response, not regret. Not explanation, just irritation. Her lips trembled as she stood up. "She described your body like she's memorized it. Is that just part of your project too?" Josiah rubbed his temples. "This isn't what it looks like. You're being emotional. She just gets carried away." Hannah stared at him with an expression that startled even herself. "So do fools," she replied. Then she walked past him without another word. Her chest ached with the kind of clarity that doesn't scream, but whispers. It's over. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And this time, she wouldn't just leave. She would end it on her own terms. The silence between Hannah and Josiah had settled into a cold routine. They exchanged necessary words, but no warmth. Still, she stayed, observing him more closely than ever. That Thursday night, she lay on the edge of the bed, back to him, staring at the wall while pretending to sleep. Josiah had been unusually quiet after dinner, barely touching his food. He'd turned in early, claiming fatigue. Hannah waited until his breathing softened, signaling he had drifted off. And then, around 2 a.m., his voice broke the stillness like a pin dropped in water. "Josephine, wait, don't leave yet," he murmured, his tone aching. Hannah didn't move. Her eyes widened, but she stayed perfectly still. "You're so beautiful," he whispered again, his breathing uneven, lips curling into a faint smile. And then, like a cruel dagger, "She doesn't understand me. Not like you do." A pause followed by a soft moan. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a fantasy. The next morning, she made breakfast without a word about the night before. Josiah shuffled into the kitchen, yawning and scratching his beard. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked calmly, flipping a pancake. "Not really. Kept tossing," he replied. She nodded and set a plate before him. Must have been all that dreaming, she said softly. You talk in your sleep, you know. He blinked, suddenly alert. Really? She leaned against the counter, arms folded. You called her name. Twice. He looked away, clearing his throat. That's weird. I don't even remember dreaming. Hannah studied his reaction. Funny. You seemed very invested. He stood up abruptly. I've got a lot on my mind, Hannah. Don't start. But she didn't press further. She didn't need to. The subconscious doesn't lie. Dreams pull from the heart's most honest places. And what she heard last night wasn't confusion. It was conviction. A part of him had already left her. She was just watching the shadow catch up to the body. It started with offhanded comments that seemed harmless until they weren't. Josiah, once indifferent to Hannah's fashion choices, began making biting remarks cloaked in advice. One morning, as she stepped out of the room in a simple navy blouse and beige skirt, he glanced at her, then looked back at his phone. You ever thought of switching things up a bit? You've been dressing like the office receptionist lately. Hannah blinked. Excuse me? He didn't lift his eyes, just saying, you could try something fitted. You're not 40 yet. She felt the sting, but remained composed. I dress how I feel, she said, and I feel like I have more dignity than to show skin just to be noticed. Josiah chuckled. Not everything's about dignity. Sometimes it's about keeping your man interested. That evening, he made another remark when she served dinner. I had Josephine's grilled prawns last week, miles better than this, he muttered under his breath. Hannah froze mid-sit. Sorry? He waved it off. Nothing, just thinking aloud. She placed the serving spoon down slowly. Maybe next time ask Josephine to cook for both of you. You know, since she's now your standard. Josiah narrowed his eyes. Don't start with the sarcasm. I'm allowed to have preferences. Hannah met his gaze, her voice cool. And I'm allowed to know when I'm no longer yours to prefer. He stared at her, caught off guard by the calm in her tone, and looked away first. Something shifted in that moment, not just the power, but the patience. Hannah was no longer clinging to his attention. She was studying it, measuring it, waiting not to win him back, but to decide when she would let him go. Hannah stood at the checkout counter of her regular grocery store, a cart full of essentials, vegetables, baby wipes for her godson's visit, and a bottle of mid-range wine. The cashier scanned the items quickly, smiling politely. But when Hannah tapped her card, the machine beeped. Declined. She tried again. Declined. Her throat tightened. Try this one, she said, handing over her backup card. Again declined. The cashier gave her a sympathetic glance as a line began to form behind her. Embarrassed, Hannah asked them to hold her cart and stepped aside to check her banking app. Her heart sank. All shared accounts had a restricted access notice. Her name was removed as a secondary user. Her savings account, thankfully, remained untouched, but Josiah had cut off every account they once shared, without a word. When Josiah returned home later that evening, she waited by the doorway of the kitchen. Did you do something to our bank accounts? She asked plainly. He raised an eyebrow. Yes, I needed to restructure finances. Too many joint charges lately. I'll give you what you need. Hannah blinked. You'll give me, she echoed. Like an allowance, Josiah shrugged. It's not like you're working full-time anymore. I've been carrying everything. Her voice trembled slightly. I put that grocery bill on my card, Josiah. You removed my access without discussing it. He looked unmoved. I didn't think you'd care. You don't even handle finances anyway. She nodded slowly, more hurt than surprised. You didn't think I'd care, because you already stopped thinking of me as your equal. He said nothing, just walked past her with his bag slung over his shoulder. The man who once made her feel like a partner now treated her like a dependent. And in that painful silence, Hannah realized he wasn't just pulling away emotionally, he was preparing her to disappear. Something had shifted so permanently in Josiah that even his tone of voice now had borders Hannah was no longer permitted to cross. She noticed it first when he'd be deep in phone conversations, laughter thick in his voice. And the moment she entered the room, his hand would instinctively move to his screen, tapping to end the call. Other times, she'd walk in and he'd swiftly close his laptop, sometimes pretending to read emails or changing screens so quickly it was almost comical. Once, she entered the living room unannounced while he was lounging, and he turned his phone face down as if on reflex. "I didn't realize you were home," he said, forcing a smile. "I live here," she replied flatly, her eyes narrowing. The tension was now so palpable, the silence between them felt louder than words. That night, she decided to test him. As Josiah laughed into his phone in the study, she walked in with a bowl of fruit. The moment he saw her, he stood up. "Can we do this later?" he said into the phone, eyes on her. Then quickly, Yeah, I'll call you back." He hung up and turned to her. "I'm in the middle of something." "Clearly," Hannah said, placing the bowl on the table. "You laugh differently when it's her." Josiah raised a brow, annoyed. "So now you're listening to how I laugh?" She folded her arms, voice quiet. "I don't have to listen. The silence that follows whenever I walk in says enough." He said nothing, but the flare in his eyes was defensive. "You're imagining things, Hannah. Seriously, this paranoia is exhausting." She didn't reply. She simply walked out because she wasn't looking for a fight. She was collecting proof, not in documents, but in behavior. Every evasive glance, every abruptly ended call, every attempt to make her feel like a ghost in her own home, it all added up. Saturday afternoon found Hannah visiting her cousin Carol, her one safe space in a world slowly imploding. Carol, vibrant and fiercely loyal, noticed something was wrong the moment Hannah stepped through the door. "You look like you've been biting back tears for days," she said, handing her a mug of ginger tea. "I don't even know what I'm feeling anymore," Hannah replied, her voice thin. They sat on the balcony as the wind rustled the bougainvillea leaves. And just as Hannah began explaining the emotional detachment Josiah had wrapped around their home, Carol's phone lit up with a WhatsApp notification. She glanced at it and blinked. "Oh, wow," she whispered, then turned her screen to Hannah. A friend had posted a photo from a dinner party at the Haven Hotel, a candid shot of a group clinking glasses. But right at the edge of the frame, clear and undeniable, was Josiah, smiling at a table, holding the hand of a woman with sleek curly hair and red nails. Hannah's lips parted, but no words came. Carol's voice was tight. "Isn't that him? And is that the same woman who came to that corporate gala with him last year?" Hannah stared, heart thudding. "That's her, Josephine." Her voice cracked like glass. Carol swiped to zoom. "Look at their hands. He's not trying to hide it. He's flaunting her." Hannah nodded slowly. "He told me he was at a supplier's retreat that night." Her cousin leaned back, lips curled in fury. "He's parading his betrayal, Hannah. This is no longer secrecy. This is strategy. He's testing how far he can go before you break." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I'm not going to break. I just need to know when to move." Quietly, precisely, Carol gripped her hand. "Whatever you need, I'm here. No man gets to humiliate you like this and walk away untouched." Hannah nodded, her gaze darkening. She no longer needed confirmation, she needed a plan. The following week, Nolan stopped by Hannah's home to finalize some lingering paperwork related to her late father's trust. Tall, soft-spoken, and always a gentleman, Nolan had been her father's confidant and now, years later, had become a quiet ally in her corner. They sat in the home office as Nolan flipped through signed forms. "You know," he began gently, "your father always said you had his instinct. He trusted you'd know what to do when things got complicated." Hannah looked up slowly. "Is that your way of asking if I'm okay?" Nolan closed the file slowly and leaned forward. "I've known Josiah for years. I know charm when it's sincere and when it's masking something. Lately he's been restless, arrogant." Hannah swallowed. "I've noticed." Nolan didn't press. He simply looked at her, then said, "You don't have to say anything now. But if there's something you need to protect, financially, legally, emotionally, you should be prepared sooner, not later." Hannah felt a lump rise in her throat. "What would you do if you suspected your partner was planning to discard you like a tenant?" Nolan didn't blink. "I'd remind them whose name is on the deed." Her breath caught. "How do you know?" He smiled faintly. "Your father had the house listed in your maiden name for a reason. He wanted you protected, even if you didn't understand it yet. The deed was updated when the will was executed. That document was never amended." Hannah sat back in stunned silence, her fingers trembling slightly. "He thinks I have nothing," she murmured. Nolan stood and gently placed the file in her hand. Then maybe it's time he realizes just how wrong he is. As he walked out the door, Hannah didn't feel like a victim anymore. For the first time in months, she felt something simmer beneath her chest, not rage, not grief, but power, carefully waiting for its cue. Josiah had told Hannah earlier in the week that Friday night was reserved for a guys' hangout, something about watching a football match at an upscale lounge on the island. He was deliberate in telling her not to wait up, citing network congestion as a reason he might not pick up if she called. Hannah didn't argue. She nodded as though she still believed him. But when she received a random tag in an Instagram story that evening, a throwback memory post from someone she barely knew, her breath stilled. The video captured a soft-lit dinner at a romantic garden restaurant. Champagne flutes, string lights, slow jazz. And seated at one of the flower-decorated tables in the background was Josiah, with Josephine. Her head leaned against his shoulder. His fingers casually stroked the inside of her wrist. Hannah's name wasn't tagged, but she didn't need it to be. She saw it all. The intimacy, the pride on his face, and worst of all, the publicness of it. This wasn't a secret. It was a statement. When Josiah returned just past midnight, she was seated at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of mint tea with unreadable calm. He walked in humming, tossed his keys on the counter, and gave a half-hearted, "Hey." Hannah took a slow sip. "How was the game?" she asked. "Oh, United won. Good vibes. Long night," he replied as he opened the fridge. She didn't respond. Instead, she slid her phone across the counter to him, paused on the Instagram story, frozen at the moment Josephine kissed his cheek. He blinked. "What's this?" She looked at him blankly. "Just a throwback. Seems like someone had better plans than football." Josiah grunted, his jaw tightening. "It's not what it looks like." She raised an eyebrow. "You're right. It looks worse." He scoffed, closing the fridge harder than necessary. "You're stalking me now?" "No," she replied evenly. "You're leaving a trail so messy even strangers can follow it." He didn't answer. He just left the room. And for the first time, she didn't feel hollow. She felt vindicated. The next morning, while dusting the bookshelves in the study, Hannah found herself drawn to a heavy wooden box she hadn't touched in years. It contained remnants of her late father's life, paperclips, ink-stained letters, hand-signed documents, and the smell of old leather. As she rummaged through it absent-mindedly, a thin brown envelope slid out and dropped to the floor. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a copy of the original property deed for their home, issued in her maiden name, Hannah Olayemi Thomas. Her father had signed it over to her 6 months before her wedding, with a note attached that read, "Never let love make you forget who you are." She sat on the floor, stunned. Through all her quiet suffering, Josiah had assumed she was the dependent, the displaced, the replaceable. But the house he lived in, insulted her in, tried to exile her from, was hers. Later that day, she called Nolan. "I found the deed," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't realize it had remained untouched." Nolan exhaled on the other end. "I suspected it might have gone unnoticed. Your father was a smart man. He anticipated this long before it came." Hannah nodded slowly, fingers brushing the bold letters on the document. "He thought ahead," she whispered. Nolan paused, then added, "The title is still valid. You never transferred ownership. Josiah has no legal claim to the house, not even partial." Hannah leaned back against the shelf, a surge of emotion pulsing through her chest, not sorrow, not revenge, but something more righteous. "He told me last week I had 3 days to pack up and go," she said. 3 days to leave a house I own." Nolan's voice was firmer now. "Then maybe it's time you give him 3 days of his own." Hannah smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in clarity. She didn't have to fight for her place. She already had it. Now she would take it back, piece by piece. Josiah had begun walking around the house with a strange sense of ownership, as though preparing the space for someone new. He started making subtle remarks that bordered on commands. "Could you move your shoes from the entryway?" "It makes the place look cluttered," he said one morning, not looking up from his phone. Hannah paused in the hallway, staring at him. "You mean my hallway, in my home?" He scoffed. "Let's not get petty, Hannah. I'm trying to elevate the space. Josephine has class. She's used to certain standards." The audacity in his tone landed harder than any slap. Not only was he replacing her emotionally, but he was preparing her physical exile as if she were some unwanted guest overstaying her welcome. That evening, Josiah sat at the dining table, browsing through what looked like curtain catalogs. Hannah passed by quietly. "I'm thinking of redoing the master bedroom soon," he said without lifting his head. "Maybe something softer, lighter tones. Josephine prefers white linen." Hannah turned slowly. "You're redecorating a room I sleep in without speaking to me." He finally looked up. "Don't be dramatic. You've barely been in that room for weeks." Her heart pounded in her chest, not out of sadness, but disbelief. "And yet you think you have the right to make it hers?" Josiah stood. "I'm done walking on eggshells. I want peace in this house, and if that means changes, then yes, changes will be made." She met his gaze with an eerie calm. "Then I hope you're ready for the biggest change yet." He tilted his head, dismissive. "I'm not afraid of whatever tantrum you're about to throw." She smiled faintly. "Oh, Josiah, it won't be a tantrum, it'll be a transition." He didn't know it yet, but he had just spoken his final words in a house that had never belonged to him to begin with. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. Hannah wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door to find a sharply dressed woman standing confidently in 4-inch heels, perfume trailing in the air like an announcement. Her hair was styled in soft curls, and her smile was condescending, polite but not warm. "Hi," the woman began. "I'm Josephine." "You must be Hannah." Hannah said nothing at first. She didn't need an introduction. The woman standing before her was the voice on the call, the name in his dream, and the hand in the dinner photo. Hannah opened the screen door and folded her arms. "Bold of you to show up uninvited," she said. Josephine didn't flinch. "I'm here to check out the house. Josiah and I are making future plans, and he said you'd be vacating soon." Her words were firm, intentional, like a stake being driven into the ground. Hannah blinked once. "So he sent you to inspect his kingdom?" Josephine tilted her head. "He said you're separating amicably." Hannah let out a small laugh, dry and disbelieving. "Did he also tell you he owns the house?" Josephine looked slightly confused. "He said he bought it before the wedding." Hannah stepped closer, her tone clipped. "Interesting. Because I have a deed that says otherwise, signed in my name, dated before I even took his." Josephine's smile faltered for the first time. "Maybe you should talk to him," she said, now clearly uneasy. "Oh, I will," Hannah said, "but let me be clear. You are not welcome in this house. Not today. Not ever." Josephine looked her up and down, then adjusted her purse strap and stepped back. "I hope we can all be adults about this," she muttered. Hannah didn't respond. She simply closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it with a deep breath. This wasn't about reclaiming her space anymore. It was about restoring her dignity, inch by inch. Starting with boundaries, no one was going to violate again. The following Saturday was Josiah's company's annual dinner gala, an event Hannah usually attended by his side. But this year, he told her plainly, it's strictly for executives and clients this time. No +1s allowed. Hannah only nodded, not questioning it. But Carol, ever suspicious, called her the same night from the venue. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice hot with outrage. "He's here, with her, Josephine." Hannah sat on her bed, her hand tightening around her phone. "Are you sure?" They just danced in the center of the ballroom. Then he knelt down in front of everyone with a ring. "Hannah." A ring. Hannah closed her eyes, her heart beating slow but heavy. "She said yes," she asked, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Not yet. People were recording. "You'll see it online by tomorrow." And sure enough, by morning, the video had gone viral among their social circles. Josiah proposing to Josephine with the confidence of a man with no conscience. When he returned home the next day, Hannah was seated on the staircase, dressed in gray loungewear, sipping tea like nothing happened. Josiah walked in with his tie loosened, a smug look on his face. "You've probably heard," he said casually, setting down his keys. "Josephine and I are getting married. It's official now." Hannah raised her brow. "I saw the video. Congratulations." He looked surprised by her calm. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I'll make the transition smooth for you." She set her cup down and stood slowly. "Transition?" "Yes," he said, as if it were an office memo. "You'll need to move out soon. I'm giving you 3 days." Josephine will be moving in next week. Hannah smiled faintly, but her eyes were steel. 3 days, she echoed. Yes, I think that's fair. He turned and walked toward the bedroom like he'd just given a delivery instruction. Hannah remained at the bottom of the stairs, her breath steady. He didn't know yet, but the countdown wasn't hers. It was his. That night, as Josiah slept peacefully, Hannah sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and Nolan on a video call. He gave me 3 days, she said, her voice calm but trembling with restraint. Nolan leaned forward, brows raised. Then let's prepare his paperwork. I'll courier the documents first thing tomorrow. Hannah nodded. I want it legally sealed. Not just to make him leave, but to remind him that I was never the one who overstayed. Nolan hesitated, then asked, Are you emotionally ready for this? It's not just paperwork, it's closure. It's confrontation. Hannah looked toward the window, then back at him. I'm ready. I've been ready since the day he told another woman she deserved my life. They spent the next hour detailing the eviction procedure, notarizing the deed, and drafting the formal notice. It wasn't revenge Hannah wanted, it was restoration. The next morning, Josiah breezed through the house, humming as he scrolled through his phone, completely unaware. He stopped briefly when he saw Hannah dressed in a simple, sleek navy dress, standing by the front door with an envelope in her hand. What's that? He asked, distracted. Your 3-day notice, she said, holding it out. He stared at her, confused. I gave you the notice yesterday. Hannah's voice was ice. No, Josiah. I'm giving you the notice. Because this house, you never owned it. Not then, not now. She placed the deed and legal letter in his hands. You're trespassing. And in exactly 72 hours, if you're not out, I'll file to have you removed by court order. His face drained of color. What are you talking about? She stepped past him, opening the door. Ask Josephine if she's still interested in living in a house that belongs to your wife. And with that, she walked out into the morning sun, leaving him standing alone, speechless, exposed, and for the first time, afraid. Josiah stood in the living room for several minutes after Hannah handed him the envelope, trying to process what had just occurred. The confidence that once dripped from his voice now lay somewhere between disbelief and panic. He opened the documents with trembling fingers, eviction notice stamped at the top. Attached was a legally notarized property deed bearing Hannah's maiden name as the sole owner of the house. It felt like the walls themselves mocked him. The house where he made declarations, where he paraded betrayal, where he spoke of his future with Josephine, wasn't his to begin with. He stormed into the kitchen where Hannah stood calmly pouring water into a kettle. Is this a joke? He hissed. No, she said without looking up. This is your reality. I've lived here for years, he growled, slamming the papers on the counter. You're my wife. She turned around and met his eyes. That's the problem, Josiah. You assumed I'd always be your wife. That I'd always stay silent. You used my loyalty against me. He looked cornered, his voice rising. So what now? You're throwing me out. You can't just... Legally I can, she interrupted, her tone sharper now. You gave me 3 days to get out. I'm giving you the same courtesy. But understand this, your name never belonged on that door. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not as the woman he discarded, but as someone he never truly knew. Hannah turned back to the kettle, unfazed. Tea? She asked softly. Or would you prefer reality, straight and scalding? He said nothing. The silence between them said enough. He had underestimated the very ground he stood on, and now it was collapsing beneath him. The next day, Nolan arrived at the house with a briefcase in hand, dressed in a crisp gray suit, every movement calm and assured. Josiah was in the living room, pacing like a man under siege. Nolan greeted Hannah with a respectful nod, then faced Josiah with a calm that only intensified the tension. Mr. Adekunle, he began, laying the papers down on the coffee table. This is a formal reiteration of the eviction notice served to you. You have exactly 48 hours left to vacate. This is non-negotiable, Josiah snorted. You're her lapdog now. Nolan didn't flinch. I'm her father's lawyer, and I protect what he left in her care. What you've done is not just betrayal, it's attempted possession of a property that was never yours. Josiah's nostrils flared. I contributed to this house. I paid for renovations. Nolan cut him off. And not once did you sign a claim to ownership. That was your oversight. Hannah stood by the doorway, silent but present. She watched Josiah's shoulders slump as Nolan continued. You are being given the opportunity to leave with some dignity. Don't make the mistake of forcing us into court. Because if this goes public, it won't just be your reputation that crumbles, it'll be your future. Josiah looked at Hannah, desperation creeping into his expression. Hannah, we can talk about this. Can't we? Just the two of us? She stepped forward. We had months to talk. You used every one of them to lie, humiliate, and prepare my replacement. So no, Josiah, we don't talk anymore. We act. Josiah turned away, unable to meet her eyes. Nolan gathered the rest of the documents and stood. We'll return in 48 hours. I suggest you be gone by then. As they left the room, the sound of Hannah's heels echoed like a verdict. She didn't need revenge. She had the law and her father's foresight on her side. On the third morning, Josiah came downstairs to find an envelope on the center table, sealed, crisp, and addressed to him in Hannah's handwriting. Inside was a final formal reminder. You have 24 hours to vacate this property. Failure to comply will result in legal enforcement and public exposure. Attached was a checklist outlining his belongings, boxed and labeled by the door. There was no emotion in the note. Just precision, just finality. He walked into the kitchen, expecting to find her. But Hannah was in the backyard garden, calmly watering her lilies, dressed in a simple blouse and jeans. She looked serene, too serene for a woman who was days from divorce. You've packed my things, he asked, arms crossed. She didn't stop what she was doing. I thought I'd be kind enough to save you the trouble. He stepped closer. You think this is victory? She turned and faced him. No, this is peace. The kind I couldn't find when you kept turning our home into a battlefield. His expression hardened. You're embarrassing me. She raised a brow. Funny. I don't recall giving you the same courtesy when you embarrassed me at dinners, in bed, on social media. Josiah looked down, unsure of what to say. I didn't think you had it in you, he muttered. Hannah smiled. That's because you never really looked at me. You saw someone safe. But strength isn't always loud, Josiah. Sometimes it's legal. She turned back to her watering, her back to him, fully aware of the power she now held. The house behind her no longer echoed his footsteps. And by sundown tomorrow it never would again. Josiah sat in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, staring at the legal envelope still on the table like it held the power to erase the reality crashing down around him. His ego had shielded him for so long, he couldn't process that Hannah's quiet strength had outmaneuvered him. He had called Josephine twice that morning, no answer. The silence stung more than expected. A week ago, he was orchestrating a future where he discarded one woman and crowned another. Now, neither was responding to his calls. The house, once his domain, now felt like a museum of things that were never truly his. Every wall, every frame, every tile chosen by Hannah or her father. His fingers trembled as he picked up the deed again. Her name. Her name had always been there. That evening, Hannah came down the stairs with her suitcase, headed toward Carol's place for the weekend to give him space to leave without further confrontation. Josiah stopped her near the door. I need to understand. Why didn't you ever tell me the house was yours? She met his eyes without hesitation. Because I didn't want it to be a weapon in our marriage. I believed we were building together. Clearly, I was wrong. I took a step closer. I made mistakes, but I didn't expect this level of coldness from you. She paused, gripping the handle of her suitcase. You don't get to define my temperature after freezing me out for years. His shoulders sagged. What happens to us now? She gave him a look that wasn't angry, just distant. There is no us, Josiah. There's you. In the mess you created. And me, finally stepping around it. With that, she opened the door and stepped into the night, leaving behind a man who had gambled on her silence and lost. Josephine arrived that afternoon, suitcase in tow, and dressed as if she was walking into her new kingdom. Her heels clicked across the pavement confidently as she rang the doorbell, expecting to be welcomed like a queen. Josiah opened the door with forced calm, but his nerves betrayed him. Hey, he said, trying to pull her into a hug. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the packed boxes. Are we moving today? She asked with a smirk. He cleared his throat. Not exactly. We need to talk. Before he could say more, Hannah appeared at the top of the stairs, composed and elegant. Josephine's eyes narrowed. "You're still here?" she asked. "I thought," Hannah cut in smoothly, "that I'd be gone. A common misconception around here." She descended the stairs slowly. "This isn't a shared space, Josephine. This is my house." Josephine blinked. "Josiah said he told me you were leaving." Hannah held up the original deed with her name. "Your fiancé told you a lot of things. Unfortunately, facts weren't among them." Josiah looked away, humiliated. "She's exaggerating. Am I?" Hannah asked coolly. "Because the last time I checked, evicting someone from their own home is still illegal." Josephine looked between the two of them, the color draining from her face. "You lied to me?" she asked Josiah, her voice trembling. "You said you owned this house." He stepped toward her. "I didn't think it mattered. What mattered is us." She shoved him back. "Don't touch me. You brought me here to play house on property that doesn't even belong to you." Hannah stepped aside and opened the door. "Feel free to leave whenever you're ready. This roof only shelters truth." Josephine stared at Josiah one last time, then picked up her suitcase, heels echoing as she walked out. This time, she didn't look back. The front door slammed with a finality that echoed through every room. Josiah stood frozen in the foyer, watching through the window as Josephine stormed toward the gate, her suitcase rolling behind her like a burden she regretted ever picking up. Hannah returned to the living room and sat gracefully, not sparing him another glance. Josiah's voice cracked as he broke the silence. "You just had to humiliate me like that." She looked at him, unbothered. "That was your doing. I just turned on the lights." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "She left me, because of you." Hannah raised her brows. "She left because of your lies, not my truth." His voice rose. "You could have let me handle it in private." She stood. "You made your betrayal public. You don't get the privilege of handling the fallout in secret." He stepped forward, desperate. "Hannah, please, let's just talk. You and I," she cut him off sharply. "You made your choice when you bent down and proposed to her while I was still your wife. What conversation do you think is left?" His face collapsed in defeat. "I didn't know she'd react like this." She took a step closer. "Of course you didn't. Because you treat women like pieces on a board, never considering that we play the game too." He looked at her, no longer with entitlement, but with shame. And still, she did not waver. "Tomorrow, you walk out of this house for good. I suggest you spend the night packing, not pleading." With those final words, Hannah walked up the stairs, not once turning around. Behind her, Josiah stood surrounded by boxed fragments of a life he'd tried to steal, now forced to carry them out of a house that never had his name on the door. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains like any normal day, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Josiah stood in the center of the living room with his luggage finally zipped, his once confident posture reduced to a sagging silhouette. He hadn't slept, he hadn't eaten, he had barely spoken. When Hannah came down, dressed in a soft linen blouse and cream trousers, poised and collected, he cleared his throat. "Can we talk before I go?" he asked, voice low. She didn't stop walking. "Talk about what?" He followed her into the kitchen. "I just need you to hear me out, please." She turned, arms folded. "Make it quick." Josiah's eyes were rimmed red. "I messed up, I know that. But I never thought I'd lose everything this way." "You, her, the home." He stopped. "Your home," he corrected, swallowing his pride. Hannah looked at him in silence, her face unreadable. "You thought I'd always be here, didn't you? That no matter what, I'd wait in the background like a forgotten chair, hoping to be useful again." Josiah took a step forward. "I was confused. Josephine was a distraction. I thought I wanted more. But it was just noise. You were the melody. The poetic attempt didn't soften her. That melody, you muted it." She shook her head. "You didn't lose me because of one mistake, Josiah. You lost me because every time you had a choice, you chose against me." He tried to reach for her hand, but she stepped back. "Please," he said, voice cracking, "don't send me away like this." She looked him dead in the eyes. "You didn't ask for permission when you tried to throw me out. Now, I'm only giving you what you thought you had the right to do." His mouth parted, but no words came. He finally saw it, not her anger, but her peace. and he knew it wasn't his to disturb anymore. Josiah's final walk through the house felt like moving through a museum of memories he hadn't truly appreciated when they were being made. He passed the hallway where Hannah once surprised him on his birthday, the kitchen where she used to leave handwritten notes on his lunch containers, the garden where she planted lilies in his mother's honor, memories he had buried beneath ego and entitlement. Nolan arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, flanked by 2 legal observers to document the exit. Everything had been done by the book. Josiah stood at the threshold, duffel bag in hand, dressed in clothes that now felt out of place. "You really won't even look at me?" he asked quietly as Hannah stood at the foot of the stairs. "There's nothing left to see," she replied. "I've said my goodbyes already. I just didn't speak them out loud." The neighbors watched from a distance, some peering through windows, others pretending to sweep their porches. Josiah glanced at the street, then back at the woman who had once been the center of his world. "I'll regret this," he whispered. Hannah nodded. "You should." He lingered for another second as if hoping she'd call him back. But she didn't. With heavy steps, he descended the porch and walked to his car. Nolan turned to her as the door shut behind him. "It's done," he said softly. She nodded but didn't reply. Instead, she walked through the house alone, room by room, placing her hand on the walls like someone reacquainting themselves with a long-lost inheritance. No fireworks, no loud music, just silence and freedom. Josiah was gone, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And as the gates closed behind him, Hannah whispered to herself, "Goodbye isn't pain, it's a release." And she felt lighter than she had in years. By noon, a locksmith arrived. He greeted Hannah with professional cheer and got to work changing every bolt, knob, and security code on the property. As the metal clinked and drills hummed, Hannah sat on the porch with a journal in her lap, writing not about the past, but about everything she now intended to reclaim. The sound of each new lock being secured felt symbolic, like a seal over wounds that were now finally healing. When the locksmith handed her the new keys, she took them with a sense of completion. "Keep the old ones," she said, handing them a small box. "Throw them into the river or burn them. Just make sure no one else ever uses them again." That evening, Carol arrived with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of sunflowers. "I saw his car leave earlier," she said, setting the flowers on the dining table. "How do you feel?" Hannah poured 2 glasses of wine and offered one. "Like I've cleaned more than just the house," she said with a small smile. "Like I've cleaned out years of settling." Carol raised her glass. "To new beginnings?" Hannah clinked it gently. "To old endings done right." They sat under the soft light of the chandelier, their laughter echoing in a house that no longer held betrayal. It held breath, beauty, and the quiet strength of a woman who didn't just survive, but rewrote the terms of her own story. Later that week, Hannah was sorting through a box of old estate papers. Nolan had recently returned to her when she came across an envelope marked in her father's handwriting. "For Hannah. Only open when the house feels heavy." Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a single-page letter, penned in blue ink with the same elegant slant her father's writing had always held. It read, "My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, then something has weighed down this house. Maybe it's grief, maybe it's betrayal. Maybe it's the quiet kind of loneliness that feels like noise. Whatever it is, I want you to remember, this house is more than walls and doors. It's your legacy. Not because I gave it to you, but because I trusted you would know how to protect it, not from thieves, but from people who try to steal your peace. Never beg for space in a life you built. Let no one turn you into a visitor in your own home. I'm proud of you, even now." Hannah read the letter twice before folding it neatly and placing it in a frame that now sat on her mantel. As she stood staring at her father's words, a single tear traced down her cheek, not from sadness, but from a strange, comforting affirmation. It was as if he had seen it all coming. She whispered, "Thank you, Daddy," then pressed her hand to the glass. Later, when Nolan stopped by to check on the transition, she showed him the letter. He read it in silence, then looked at her with deep respect. "He really knew you," he said softly. Hannah nodded. "And he made sure I wouldn't forget myself." Nolan sat beside her. "Do you realize what you've done? You didn't just survive a betrayal. You reclaimed something deeper. Your voice, your place. She looked toward the hallway, where echoes of past arguments used to haunt her. It doesn't echo anymore, she said. It breathes now. The house, once burdened by secrets, was now filled with clarity, and the blessing of a father who prepared his daughter for storms she hadn't even seen coming. A week passed, then two, and with each day the house felt more like a sanctuary than a battleground. Hannah rearranged the furniture, not to forget what had happened, but to mark a new rhythm. She turned the former guest room into a reading nook, where sunlight poured in through sheer curtains. She painted the master bedroom in soft earth tones, not to erase the past, but to restore serenity. In the mornings, she took walks barefoot through her garden, sipping tea, watching the lilies bloom again. Neighbors who had watched from afar began greeting her differently, with warmth instead of pity. The shift wasn't just in her home, it was in her aura. People sensed it. There was a wholeness about her now, a quiet confidence born not of pride, but of healing. One Sunday after church, Carol brought over a fresh batch of lemon scones. They sat under the gazebo in the backyard, the scent of rain in the air. "You're glowing," Carol said, biting into her pastry. "Did you change your skincare?" Hannah laughed. "Just changed my piece." Carol leaned back, smiling. "What now?" "You've won. You're free. What's next?" Hannah stirred her tea thoughtfully. "I don't know. I'm not rushing it. For the first time in years, I'm not planning for someone else. I'm listening to what I want, what I need. The silence is teaching me." Carol nodded in approval. "That's a woman right there. Not just recovered, but restored." Hannah smiled, closing her eyes as the breeze brushed against her skin. She didn't need grand declarations or fireworks. Peace wasn't loud. It was sitting with her now, in the shade of a backyard that finally felt like hers. It was a quiet Tuesday when Nolan came by with some final estate updates. They sat in the living room, sipping coffee, when he hesitated and glanced at her. "There's something I've wanted to say, but I didn't know if it was the right time," he began. Hannah looked up, curious. "Go on." He set his cup down, his voice careful but clear. "I've admired you for a long time. Not just for how you've handled all this, but for who you are beneath it. Your calm, your resolve, it's rare." She blinked, a bit taken aback. "Nolan," he raised a hand gently. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it. You deserve to hear it from someone who isn't trying to break you or fix you, just honor you." For a moment, the room felt suspended in time. Hannah didn't speak immediately. She just stared at him. This man who had stood in the background during her storms, never inserting himself, never pushing. "Thank you," she said finally. "That means more than I can explain." Nolan nodded, respecting her space. "If you ever want to talk about anything, not as a lawyer, but as a friend, I'm here," she smiled. "I know." He stood to leave, and at the door he paused. "Hannah, you didn't just reclaim a house. You reclaimed your voice, and the world needs more of that." After he left, Hannah stood in the doorway for a long time, the breeze lifting her hair. She wasn't thinking about romance. She wasn't even thinking about loss. She was thinking about how good it felt to be seen. Not as someone recovering, but as someone becoming. And she liked the woman she was becoming. Josephine sat on the edge of her rented apartment bed, the overhead fan spinning lazily above her as the echo of her own thoughts filled the room. The proposal video that once gave her pride now haunted her inbox, a viral memory of a man who promised her a kingdom on stolen soil. Since that day, jobs had been scarce, invitations fewer, and whispers louder. Colleagues who once admired her elegance now referenced her name in side glances and knowing smirks. But what ate her more than the humiliation was the realization that she was never chosen fully, only used temporarily. Her phone buzzed. It was an old photo of her and Josiah at the Haven Hotel, sent by a friend with the caption, "So, this aged well." She flung the phone onto the bed, her pride now threadbare. Later that evening, she opened her email and, after 10 minutes of hesitation, typed out a message to Hannah. Subject, closure. Message, "I know I owe you more than this. I didn't know he was capable of that kind of deception. I genuinely thought I had something real. I see now I was part of the wreckage, not the reward. I'm sorry for crossing lines I didn't understand until too late." She hovered over the send button, then hit it. Hours passed, but there was no reply. Hannah had seen the message while sipping tea on her porch, the night air cool against her skin. She read it once, nodded to herself, then deleted it. No anger, no reply, just closure on her own terms. Josephine, staring at the silence in her inbox, finally understood. Some forgiveness comes in the form of being forgotten. On a warm Saturday morning, Hannah stepped out onto the porch wearing a soft white caftan, her hair wrapped in a patterned scarf that once belonged to her mother. She carried a journal in one hand and a steaming cup of hibiscus tea in the other. The garden was blooming, the air calm. She sat in her favorite chair, crossed her legs, and began to write not about pain, not even about Josiah, but about plans. The bookshop she wanted to open, the women's retreat she dreamed of organizing, the solo trip to Cape Town she kept postponing. For once, her dreams weren't detoured by someone else's comfort. She wasn't seeking revenge, restoration, or romance. She was seeking herself and finding her everywhere she looked. Carol arrived later that afternoon, placing a newspaper on the table. "Page 5, she said with a mischievous grin. Hannah flipped to it. There was a small column about Josiah's resignation from his firm, something about a scandal, improper dealings, and breached ethics. Hannah read it not with malice, but with mild detachment. "Life has a way of teaching," she said quietly. Carol raised her brow. "And what did it teach you?" Hannah smiled. "That silence isn't weakness. That letting go can be louder than shouting. And that I don't need to prove my worth to people who can't recognize it." The two women sat there, sipping from their glasses, while the world turned. Hannah's home, now echoing only laughter and possibility, was no longer a battlefield, but a fortress of peace, planted on truth and protected by a woman who finally chose herself. Here's the Bible verse, Proverbs 14 verse 1. "The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down." Explanation. This verse mirrors Hannah's journey. While Josiah and Josephine tried to tear her down through lies and betrayal, Hannah stood firm, wise, and strategic. She didn't respond with loud vengeance, but with clarity, law, and quiet power, ultimately preserving the legacy her father left her and building her own sanctuary of peace. Moral of the story: never underestimate the strength of a woman who knows her worth. True power is not loud, it is steady, principled, and rooted in self-respect. When betrayal is met with dignity and clarity, justice doesn't always roar, it simply arrives, undeniable and complete. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.